Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a chilling and twisted tale, one of betrayal, deception, and a deadly obsession. This is the story of Giovanni Brusca, the man who pushed the button. A tale of power, revenge, and calculated violence. This case will leave you wondering, what lengths will someone go to when their loyalty is tested? And how could someone so ruthless be allowed to roam free for so long? Stay with us as we unravel the dark and tragic story of Giovanni Brusca. What drives a man to become both a feared executioner and the ultimate betrayer of the empire he once served? Giovanni Brusca, the ruthless mafia boss infamously known as the Pig, orchestrated one of Italy's most horrifying assassinations and unleashed a wave of terror that shook a nation. But in a shocking twist, the man who pressed the button that killed Judge Giovanni Falcone would later destroy the very organization that made him untouchable. This is the chilling and unexpected story of loyalty, betrayal, and justice that forever changed Sicily. Giovanni Brusca's story began in the heart of Sicily, a land steeped in tradition, beauty, and unrelenting violence. Born into a mafia family, his path was laid out long before he could even comprehend its gravity. The Brusca clan had deep roots in the Cosa Nostra, the infamous Sicilian Mafia, and from a young age, Giovanni was immersed in its shadowy world. His childhood was not marked by games or schoolyard friendships, but by lessons in loyalty, silence, and the art of intimidation. It was clear to everyone around him that Giovanni was destined for power, and he embraced his legacy with a chilling determination. By the time Giovanni entered his 20s, he had already made a name for himself within the mafia's ranks. He was a man of action, known for his ability to carry out orders without hesitation, no matter how brutal. This unflinching obedience earned him the favor of Salvatore Toto Riina, the feared and ruthless boss of Cosa Nostra. Riina saw in Giovanni a man who could be trusted to do the unthinkable, someone who would never flinch under pressure. Under Riina's mentorship, Giovanni rose swiftly, moving from a foot soldier to one of the most powerful enforcers in the organization. But Giovanni's ascent was not fueled solely by loyalty. He was ambitious, driven by a hunger for influence that even his peers found unnerving. He understood that power in the mafia was not just about wealth or violence. It was about control of people, of information, and of fear. Giovanni mastered these elements with calculated precision. He became a key figure in the mafia's operations, orchestrating extortion, spionaging, drug trafficking routes, and ensuring the loyalty of those beneath him through a combination of rewards and terror. Despite his growing power, Giovanni remained acutely aware of the dangers that came with his position. The mafia was a world where trust was fragile and betrayal was inevitable. He had seen men who once sat at the top brought down by whispers and conspiracies. To survive, Giovanni cultivated an image of unwavering loyalty to Riina and the mafia. He carried out orders with ruthless efficiency, never questioning the morality or consequences of his actions. It was this reputation that solidified his place in Riina's inner circle, but it also marked him as a man to be feared and ultimately watched. As Giovanni's influence grew, so did his appetite for control. He began to see himself not just as a servant of the mafia, but as a potential leader. He dreamed of one day stepping out of Riina's shadow, of becoming the man who dictated the rules rather than followed them. But Giovanni knew that such a move would require more than ambition. It would demand cunning, patience, and a willingness to eliminate anyone who stood in his way. The early 1990s marked a turning point for Giovanni and the mafia. The Italian government, spurred by a growing public outcry, had intensified its crackdown on organized crime. High-profile arrests and convictions were beginning to destabilize the once invincible Cosa Nostra. For Giovanni, this was both a challenge and an opportunity. He saw the chaos as a chance to prove his worth to Riina and to position himself as an indispensable asset. But with the increased pressure from law enforcement, the stakes were higher than ever. A single misstep could mean prison or worse. Giovanni's rise was marked by a series of chilling decisions that demonstrated his commitment to the mafia's cause. He orchestrated violent reprisals against those who dared to oppose Cosa Nostra, ensuring that the organization's reputation for brutality remained intact. Yet, as his power grew, so did his list of enemies. Within the mafia, jealousy and suspicion began to fester. Some saw Giovanni's loyalty as a facade, a mask for his true intentions. Others feared his growing influence, worrying that he was becoming too powerful, too ambitious. But Giovanni remained undeterred. He believed he was destined for greatness, that his path to the top was inevitable. What he didn't realize was that his journey would lead him to a crossroads, one that would force him to make a decision that would forever alter his life and the fate of the Mafia. The weight of loyalty, ambition, and survival would soon collide in a way that no one, not even Giovanni, could have anticipated. And in the shadows of Sicily, the stage was set for a moment that would shock the world. The Mafia thrived on fear, secrecy, and an unspoken code of silence, but by the early 1990s, the walls of its empire were beginning to crack. Decades of unchecked power had emboldened its leaders, but it had also drawn the attention of those who sought to dismantle it. Among these figures were Judges Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, two tireless crusaders for justice who had dedicated their lives to exposing the Mafia's intricate web of corruption. Their resolve threatened the very foundation of Cosa Nostra, and the Mafia's leadership knew they could not be allowed to continue. Within the ranks of the Mafia, the order came down to eliminate Falcone. This was no ordinary assassination. Falcone was not just a man, he was a symbol of resistance, of hope for a Sicily free from the Mafia's grip. Killing him would not only silence a major threat, but also send a chilling message to anyone who dared challenge Cosa Nostra's authority. The task required precision, cunning, and absolute ruthlessness. Salvatore Riina, the Mafia's undisputed boss, turned to the one man he trusted to see it through, Giovanni Brusca. For Giovanni, this was a defining moment. Carrying out such a high-profile murder would solidify his position within the Mafia and prove his loyalty to Riina. But it was not a decision he took lightly. This was not a routine hit on a rival or an informant. This was an act that would draw the attention of the entire world, an act that would place him at the center of history's spotlight. Yet, despite any doubts or hesitation, Giovanni accepted the mission without question. Loyalty to the Mafia and its leaders was all he had ever known. The plan to kill Falcone was meticulous. For weeks, Giovanni and his men scouted locations, studied Falcone's movements, and prepared the tools of destruction. They chose a stretch of highway near Capaci, just outside Palermo, as the site for the attack. It was an area where Falcone frequently traveled, and its isolation would allow them to execute the plan without immediate interference. The weapon of choice was as devastating as it was symbolic, a massive bomb buried beneath the road, powerful enough to obliterate everything in its path. On May 23, 1992, the plan was put into action. Giovanni and his team lay in wait, monitoring Falcone's convoy as it approached the trap. The moment was tense, every second stretching into an eternity. When the convoy reached the designated spot, Giovanni made the fateful decision. He pushed the button, detonating the bomb and unleashing a wave of destruction that echoed across the island. The explosion was catastrophic, leaving a gaping crater in the highway and killing Falcone, his wife Francesca, and 3 police officers. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. The assassination sent shockwaves through Italy and beyond, sparking outrage and grief on a scale the Mafia had never anticipated. What they had intended as a demonstration of power instead became a rallying cry for change. The public, already weary of the Mafia's grip, erupted in protests demanding justice for Falcone and an end to the violence that had plagued Sicily for decades. For Giovanni, the mission was a success, but it came at a cost. The Mafia had struck a blow against its enemies, but it had also drawn unprecedented attention to its operations. The Italian government, under immense pressure from its citizens and the international community, launched an all-out offensive against Cosa Nostra. New anti-mafia laws were enacted, and law enforcement agencies were given unprecedented resources to dismantle the organization. As the heat intensified, Giovanni's position became increasingly precarious. He had carried out Riina's orders, but he could feel the walls closing in. The assassination had made him a target, not only for the authorities but also for rivals within the Mafia who saw his growing notoriety as a threat. He had proven his loyalty, but in doing so he had also placed himself at the center of a storm that showed no signs of dissipating. The murder of Giovanni Falcone marked a turning point in the fight against the Mafia. It was an act of unparalleled brutality, one that demonstrated the depths of Cosa Nostra's power and the lengths to which they would go to protect their empire. But it also exposed their vulnerabilities, setting the stage for a reckoning that would shake Sicily to its core. For Giovanni Brusca, the man who pushed the button, the fallout was only beginning. The path he had chosen would lead him deeper into the darkness, where survival was far from guaranteed. The murder of Giovanni Falcone was a seismic event that shook the Mafia's foundation and ignited a firestorm of public outrage. In the aftermath of the assassination, Sicily erupted in protests, with citizens demanding justice for Falcone and an end to the Mafia's reign of terror. The Italian government, under immense pressure, declared war on Cosa Nostra. This was no longer a localized effort, it became a nationwide operation to dismantle the Mafia's network and bring its leaders to justice. At the top of their list was Giovanni Brusca, the man who had orchestrated the horrific attack. Giovanni Brusca became one of Italy's most wanted fugitives. His face was plastered on wanted posters and broadcast across the nation. He was now a symbol of the Mafia's brutality and arrogance, and the government was determined to bring him down. But Giovanni was no stranger to life in the shadows. He had been raised in a world where survival meant being invisible, and he used every resource at his disposal to disappear. For years he evaded capture, moving from one hideout to another, always staying one step ahead of the authorities. Hiding in the rugged terrain of Sicily, Giovanni relied on the loyalty of his mafia associates and a network of safe houses to remain elusive. He knew the island better than anyone, its remote villages, dense forests, and winding mountain roads. Law enforcement faced an uphill battle as they hunted him, often arriving at hideouts mere hours after he had fled. Despite their growing frustration, the authorities refused to give up. They were closing in inch by inch, determined to corner the man who had become a ghost. The manhunt for Giovanni Brusca wasn't just about catching one fugitive, it was a battle for the soul of Sicily. For decades, the Mafia had ruled through fear, silencing anyone who dared to oppose them. But the tides were shifting. The assassination of Falcone had emboldened law enforcement, and the public was no longer willing to stay silent. Informants began to come forward, breaking the Mafia's sacred code of omerta. Each new piece of information brought the authorities closer to their target. As Giovanni remained in hiding, his world began to crumble. The Mafia was under siege, its network of power and influence unraveling. High-ranking members were arrested, and key operations were dismantled. Even within Cosa Nostra, trust began to erode. Giovanni, once a rising star within the organization, found himself increasingly isolated. Rivals whispered about his recklessness, blaming him for the intense scrutiny they now faced. The very act that had cemented his loyalty to Riina was now a source of division. The longer Giovanni evaded capture, the more determined the authorities became. Investigators pored over every lead, every fragment of intelligence, desperate to locate the man responsible for so much destruction. But Giovanni was not invincible. The pressure of life on the run began to take its toll. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, unable to rest, knowing that his freedom could be snatched away at any moment. Every knock at the door, every unfamiliar face, carried the threat of betrayal. For nearly 4 years, Giovanni played a dangerous game of cat and mouse with the authorities. His confidence, once unshakable, began to waver. He could feel the net closing in, the circle tightening around him. The isolation of his fugitive life wore on him, but he refused to surrender. He still believed he could outwit his pursuers, that he could remain untouchable. What he didn't realize was that his capture was no longer a matter of if, but when. In 1996, the game came to an end. After years of relentless pursuit, the authorities finally tracked Giovanni Brusca to a remote hideout. The man who had once wielded so much power was arrested without fanfare, his attempt to flee cut short by the very forces he had spent his life evading. For Giovanni, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would bring revelations even more shocking than the crimes that had defined him. But for Sicily, his arrest was a moment of reckoning, a sign that even the most feared figures in the Mafia could not escape justice forever. Giovanni Brusca's capture in 1996 marked a monumental victory for Italian law enforcement, but the story was far from over. The manhunt had ended, but the secrets locked inside Brusca's mind were just beginning to surface. The authorities knew that capturing him was only part of the battle. Giovanni had been a central figure in the Mafia's operations, privy to its most guarded secrets. Now, sitting in a prison cell, he was faced with a choice that could change everything not just for him, but for the entire criminal organization he had served. What happened next shocked everyone. Giovanni Brusca agreed to cooperate with the authorities. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he became a pentito, a mafia informant, turning against the very organization he had sworn allegiance to. The decision sent shockwaves through Cosa Nostra. For decades, the mafia's strength had rested on its code of silence, its ability to keep its secrets hidden from the outside world. Brusca's betrayal was a devastating blow, one that exposed vulnerabilities the organization had long tried to hide. Giovanni's cooperation was both a blessing and a curse for the authorities. On one hand, his knowledge was invaluable. He provided detailed accounts of mafia operations, naming names and revealing the inner workings of the organization. His testimony led to the arrests of high-ranking members and dismantled critical elements of Cosa Nostra's power structure. On the other hand, the sheer brutality of his crimes made his role as an informant deeply controversial. Many questioned whether someone responsible for so much suffering deserved any form of leniency. As Giovanni began to reveal the extent of his involvement in mafia activities, the true scale of his atrocities came to light. He admitted to orchestrating Falcone's murder, but that was only the beginning. His testimony unveiled a chilling pattern of violence, including kidnappings, torture, and cold-blooded killings. One of the most horrifying revelations was his role in the kidnapping and murder of 12-year-old Giuseppe Di Matteo, the son of a mafia informant. The boy had been held captive for over 2 years before being killed and his body dissolved in acid, a punishment meant to send a message to anyone who considered betraying the mafia. These confessions painted a portrait of a man who had not only carried out orders, but had embraced the brutality of his role. Yet, despite the horrors he had unleashed, Brusca's cooperation was a turning point in the fight against organized crime. His detailed knowledge of mafia operations allowed law enforcement to strike at the heart of Cosa Nostra, crippling its leadership and disrupting its influence across Sicily. But Giovanni's betrayal came at a cost. Within the mafia, his name became synonymous with treachery. Former allies now viewed him as the ultimate traitor, a man who had turned his back on the very system that had elevated him to power. Even in prison, he was not safe. Threats against his life were constant, and he was forced to live under tight security, isolated from other inmates to prevent retaliation. For the public, Giovanni's transformation from feared mafia boss to government informant was deeply polarizing. Some saw him as a necessary evil, a tool to dismantle the mafia's stranglehold on Sicily. Others viewed him as a monster who had escaped true justice by striking a deal. Families of his victims, in particular, were outraged that he might one day walk free despite the atrocities he had committed. Giovanni's cooperation did not absolve him of guilt, and he knew it. His every word, every revelation was a reminder of the lives he had destroyed. Yet, he continued to testify, unraveling decades of secrecy and exposing the mafia's darkest corners. His betrayal of Cosa Nostra was a fatal blow to its power, but it also marked the beginning of his own unraveling. Giovanni Brusca, once a symbol of the mafia's strength, had become its greatest liability. Even as his testimony brought down powerful figures within the organization, the question remained: could he ever truly escape the shadow of his past? For Giovanni, cooperation was not redemption, it was survival. And while he may have dismantled the empire he once served, the legacy of his crimes would haunt him forever. In betraying the mafia, he had also condemned himself, ensuring that his name would be remembered not just for his brutality, but for the secrets he had laid bare. Giovanni Brusca's decision to turn informant shattered the mafia's grip on secrecy and marked a decisive moment in the battle against organized crime. Yet, his cooperation also left lingering questions about justice and morality. As he continued to provide testimony, laying bare the inner workings of the Cosa Nostra, his revelations reshaped Sicily's fight against the mafia. But the price of his cooperation, for both him and society, was far from simple. Giovanni's testimony led to a wave of arrests and convictions that decimated the mafia's hierarchy. The once untouchable Salvatore Riina was already behind bars, but Brusca's information helped confirm his orders and solidify the case against him. Other powerful figures within Cosa Nostra fell in the years that followed, as Brusca unraveled a web of criminal networks that spanned not just Sicily, but the entire country. His detailed accounts also gave investigators insight into how the Mafia laundered money, infiltrated politics, and maintained its iron grip over communities through violence and fear. However, as the public absorbed the extent of Brusca's crimes, outrage grew. People found it hard to reconcile his role as a collaborator with the monstrous acts he had committed. The kidnapping and murder of Giuseppe Di Matteo in particular haunted Italy. The boy's father had dared to cooperate with the authorities, and Brusca had used the child as a pawn in a twisted revenge plot, holding him captive for more than 2 years before murdering him in one of the most gruesome ways imaginable showcased a level of cruelty that few could fathom. Many questioned whether Brusca deserved the reduced sentence he had been granted in exchange for his cooperation. For his victims' families, the very notion of leniency felt like an insult. Protests erupted when news broke that his cooperation would allow him to serve a significantly shorter prison term than others convicted of far lesser crimes. Brusca, however, remained an enigma. He showed no signs of remorse in public, and his cold demeanor only fueled the perception that he had manipulated the system to save himself. Despite his cooperation, life behind bars was no reprieve for Brusca. Even within the tightly controlled confines of his prison cell, he lived under constant threat. Members of the Mafia he had betrayed vowed revenge, and whispers of assassination plots were never far from the surface. Brusca was moved frequently, kept under heavy guard to prevent any attack. Yet, even in isolation, his past followed him. Guards, inmates, and the public all viewed him as both a traitor and a killer, a man who had navigated the darkest depths of humanity and emerged unscathed, or so it seemed. In 2021, after serving 25 years in prison, Brusca was released. His release was met with widespread outrage, reigniting debates about justice, accountability, and the ethics of cutting deals with men like him. For many, it was unthinkable that someone responsible for so much death and suffering could walk free. Protests filled the streets, and survivors of his crimes took to the media to condemn the system that had allowed his release. Yet the law had been clear his cooperation had earned him a reduced sentence, and his time had been served. Outside prison, Brusca's freedom was far from complete. He was placed under heavy police protection, not for his safety, but to ensure that he did not return to his old ways or fall victim to a mafia revenge plot. His life became a shadow of what it once was, defined by secrecy and anonymity. Yet questions lingered about whether he could ever truly leave his past behind. Could a man who had orchestrated so much violence ever find redemption, or would he forever remain a symbol of Sicily's darkest days? For Sicily, the scars of Brusca's crimes remain. His betrayal of the Mafia exposed its weaknesses and allowed the government to deliver devastating blows to its power structure. Yet the pain he caused left an indelible mark on the island and its people. Families shattered by his actions struggle to heal, and the memory of his victims continues to haunt the nation. Brusca's life serves as both a cautionary tale and a grim reminder of the cost of power unchecked by morality. Giovanni Brusca's name is etched into history as both a monster and a man who inadvertently helped dismantle the Mafia's empire. His story is one of contradictions, of loyalty turned to betrayal, of destruction followed by cooperation. It is a tale that leaves no easy answers, only questions about justice, redemption, and the price of breaking the silence that held a criminal empire together for so long. Even now, as Brusca lives in obscurity, the legacy of his choices continues to ripple through Sicily, a reminder that some wounds never fully heal. Thank you for watching this chilling tale of Giovanni Brusca, a man who pushed the button, set off a chain of events, and survived it all. If you found this story gripping, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Mystery Minds for more true crime stories that uncover the darkest corners of the world. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep questioning the world around you.